Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our 8th wine tasting event for our special clients at Presilium Private Wealth. We're grateful to be here with all of you. If you were invited to this event, then you are very important to us. Our life's work is to ensure that you all reach your financial goals and have a great experience along the way. Every decision we make is made with your success in mind and drives us each and every day. Thank you. Tonight is also a celebration. At the start of the year, we gave you 3 reasons that we were optimistic about 2023. And as we approach year end, it has been a tremendous year. And because of your faith in us, you have all had excellent results. In fact, the S&P 500 was just up about 9% in the month of November alone, one of the best months ever. This may be a good statement to frame and hang up in your office. As usual, we remain ready to take advantage of whatever the world and the market gives us next, actively working on your behalf each and every day. Now, I don't want to stand in the way any longer of 3 amazing bottles of wine and our fantastic sommelier. Please let me introduce my good friend, Brandon of Vin-Decision, who's going to guide us through a tasting of 3 different but amazing wines. We are also looking forward to decoding a wine labeled like an expert during our event tonight. Brandon, welcome back. We are thrilled to have you with us again.
Thank you, Jerry. It's great to be back. And I hope there's some friendly faces in the crowd. Nice to see you, virtually at least. If you've already started drinking or taking a sip, good for you. That's exactly what these bottles are for. They are for you. If you have not started drinking, do not wait for me. We are starting with the white wine, and then we are going to move to the Bordeaux, which has this kind of tan yellow label. And then we're going to end with Ridge. And this is a lineup that I'm very excited about. So hopefully you've already gotten a taste of some of this, but white wine first. And even if white wine's not your vibe, even if white wine, in the fall, almost winter, sounds strange, give it a chance because I think this wine is absolutely stellar. But before we get there, my name is Brandon Borcoman, as Jerry said, and I used to be a wine director in New York City at a restaurant called Charlie Bird. I was there for about 5 years, and that's where I really honed my wine skills, my wine prowess, because I was able to open up phenomenal wine on a daily basis. But one of my mentors actually won the world's best sommelier in 2016. And that happened in Argentina at that time. And so him and I would practice a lot for his own competition. But I would also be in the action with one of the world's best on the regular. And so we'd kind of look at a wine, no matter how much it costs, from $5,000 to, 20, 30 bucks, and really understand it and try to kind of pin down the philosophy of it, try to, celebrate it no matter its cost. So that's where I come from. I didn't go to school for wine. I learned it the hard knock life way, as it were, on the floor, in the grit. I've gone to enough school, so I don't need more of that. But I do love wine, and I talk about it in my own way. So hopefully, if nothing else, this is going to be an access point for many of you who sometimes might be intimidated by sommeliers at a restaurant, let's say, or just haven't had good interactions, which I've been there myself. So we're going to put a lot of that aside, and I'm going to talk to you about wine in my own way, which is to say, I'm going to use words that I like to use when I talk about wine. I don't necessarily think it needs to be this dry, mechanical, almost scientific manner of speaking. And so I encourage you to listen to the words that make sense to you and maybe take them as your own when you decide to go out into the world and order your own wine. As I said, though, we are going to start with the white wine. I'm going to bring up images, different maps, different ways of interacting with you and helping to immerse you in these different environments and regions. So hopefully that gives you a sort of mind's eye of where we are in the world. To give you a primer, we are actually just in France, and North America, specifically California tonight. That's not to say these are the only places you should be buying wine from. Not at all. But one, I really like highlighting California because I think sometimes it flies under the radar still, even though it deserves all the praise. And France, if you're smart about buying wine in France, then you can really capitalize on a lot of value. And that's what I aim to show you tonight. So put questions in the chat box along the way. I'm going to save some time, probably around 10 minutes toward the end, so you can ask whatever question you have. Doesn't have to be pertinent to what I say, but keep the questions in the chat box. Jerry and I will keep an eye on them, and I will try to get to them in a timely manner. All right. So when you're tasting wine, always remember, this is a good idea, provided you're not spilling on your neighbor or partner. What you're doing when you're doing this is opening up the wine. You're introducing oxygen to it. And as the wine sees oxygen, it's developing, it's evolving. And what we want to do is have the aromatics especially evolve. We want them to develop. The more they do that, the more we are going to get out of the wine. The more experiential, sensual it's going to be, sensual with mainly olfactory and nose. So when you do taste a wine, remember, smell the wine. This is like 75 to 80% of the experience is simply smelling it. If you were to forego that step, you're really missing most of the wine, to be honest. On the palate, you find structure, you find acidity, you find maybe some flavors, but you don't understand the whole unless you spend time smelling it. So smell your wine if you haven't already. What I love, I mean, there's so many things I like about this wine, so I'll keep it there. As I said, we are going to France. So I'm going to show you what France looks like in case you need a refresh. France is actually, from a wine speaking point of view, a fairly kind of blank map. You can see all this blank space. All of this white space indicates places that may or may not have grapes, but we're not that concerned if they do. The places that are colored in are the places we pay attention to in France. And no need to squint, because even with my glasses, I understand. I will zoom in on all of these. But what I want to show you here is that France is not actually that difficult to get a grasp of. You'll see that if you've been to France, you've probably flown into Paris. If you were in Paris, you're fairly near Champagne. What is that? An hour, hour and a half on train away from Champagne. That is the northern limits of grape growing. So there's a reason why Champagne has bubbles. Without those bubbles, that juice is pretty fierce and it would rip the enamel off your teeth. Some Champagne kind of does that already. So you can imagine otherwise without the bubbles. And then if you've been kind of to the south, you'll see where Provence, Marseille, the Rhone Valley, we are going to pay attention to the Loire Valley. So all of this green stretching from Puy-Fumé and Sancerre over here, which is kind of directly in the center of France, all the way to Muscadet, which is by the ocean. And then we're also going to venture into Bordeaux. Loire Valley exists as one of my favorite regions in the entire world, mainly because it's so diverse. When you taste this wine, you might not even realize actually that it's Sauvignon Blanc. It's 100%. Maybe some of you did. But what I love about that is it's not just the grape talking, right? It's not just, your typical maybe expression or expectation of Sauvignon Blanc that's showing through. No, this is a very unique iteration, a very unique personality and identity that shows itself. And that, to me, is what makes the Loire Valley exciting, because it does that throughout the entirety of this region. Loire Valley is a very exciting place to visit if you ever get the chance. You can get on the river actually, and kind of take like a barge down, meander through vineyards and castles. I love these pictures. I have a few castles. I just love castles next to vineyards. It's so picturesque, so beautiful, but also it shows you to a certain extent the history of the Loire Valley. This is where noble men and noble women used to vacation. This was the spot. And so you'll still see remnants of this old glory, and still kind of beautiful and glorious. You'll still see remnants, though, as you go along the Loire Valley, right? And these vineyards really abut these majestic castles, which is really cool. There's not many places in the world that does it like this. But what's important here, too, is that there is a river nearby. And this river really helps temper the climate. It helps these grapes get to the right maturity. It helps them also exist in a very specific way. Every wine region has its own specialty, and the Loire Valley really thrives off this river sort of atmosphere. That river does a lot, not only with the soils there being very much influenced by it, but also that overall temperature is generally quelled by that river. That is to say, when it gets super hot, you have the river kind of that effect coming in, cooling things down, allowing for that exact temperature to come in. So when the grapes are actually picked, you're in a very good zone. It's a nice place for grapes to grow without even humans messing around with it too much. What do you think about this wine? And you can always type it in. I already have a great question from Bob, which I'll answer in a second. Or at least think about what you think about this wine. How do you explain it? How do you describe it? Is it different than what you thought? When I take a smell of this wine, what I love about it is that fruit isn't really the star of the show here. Fruit is there for sure, but it's sort of lingering in the background. What I smell is sort of this oceanic, saline, marine, maybe even like hints of like overt saltiness there, brininess. That's what comes to the forefront for me. And I love that. So this earthy component is really prominent here, which I smell immediately without even tasting it. That's a cool side of Sauvignon Blanc. And so what Bob asked is Puy Fumé always a Sauvignon Blanc? This is a great question. So if you have your bottle nearby, take a look at it. That word we said, Puy Fumé, is right here. And this is essentially the village. And you're always looking on a bottle for that village, especially when you're in the old world. So France, Spain, Europe at large is the old world. And you can go beyond that a little bit too. But the old world always has the region it comes from, and it rarely has the grape on it. In fact, both of our old world bottles, so both of our bottles from France, are not going to have the grapes on them. I'm just making sure the Bordeaux doesn't. And that's normal. That is traditional. That is what you expect. You need to come with this knowledge, unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever way you want to look at it. You need to come with this knowledge that the grapes are sort of your responsibility. You need to know that. So since we know it's from Puy Fumé, and maybe this would require a Google search in a store, now you know it's always going to be 100% Sauvignon Blanc. How do you remember that? I don't know. Find a way to a memory device. One way to remember it, though, is just to picture where we are. And this is the Loire Valley again. And I like this because it shows everything. This is an old school map, so pardon if it's not the most aesthetically pretty, but this is what actually I've used in a lot of my Loire classes. And because it shows every single area, so you see the diversity, you see the vast nature of the Loire Valley. And I said we are right next to Sancerre, which we are. And right next to Sancerre, literally on the other side of the river, is this place called Puy Fumé, which is in our glass. Puy Fumé, being on the other side of the tracks, so to speak, never gets as much attention as Sancerre. Both regions excel and accentuate the beauty of Sauvignon Blanc. Both regions, as you can probably just tell by this map, have very similar geology. That is to say, the stuff underneath the grapes, the topsoil, the microclimate, all these natural factors are very similar to one another. I mean, they're right next to each other. So how could they not be? It's just in the hierarchy of marketing, probably too, but in the hierarchy of wines, Sancerre is at the top because it did a better job of putting itself forward before Puy Fumé. Also, say Puy Fumé in an American accent like me, out loud, and you'll see that it's not the easiest word to say, probably. It might look confusing on a label. Unfortunately, these sort of artificial and superficial things have a lot to do with how a wine can sell. So why do I bring Puy-Fumé to you? Well, because it is some of the most insane value that you can find in the Loire Valley and in France. I would say even this in France as a whole. This is it. When you find Puy-Fumé, number one, there's not a ton of producers who make it, at least not a ton of producers that make it as far across the ocean to us. And so they're within that kind of smaller crowd of producers, the quality tends to be quite high. But you also see so many similarities between Sancerre and Puy-Fumé. I actually like Sancerre quite a bit, even though it is somewhat ubiquitous and omnipresent on nearly every single wine list and wine store in the world. So you can find iterations that aren't that exciting. The ones that are very exciting. So we see Puy-Fumé here. You see at the top Pascal Jolivet. That's the producer. So two things that you're always looking for are nailed. And then you're looking for the vintage. We'll see in other labels that there's a few other things that you can pick out. But if you have those three things, if you have producer, village, and or region where it comes from, and vintage, you're reading a wine label successfully. This vintage is 2019, so we're drinking a white wine with a little bit of age on it, which is always exciting. It shows you how white wine can age, just like red wine. It's just as complicated, just as complex, and it's going to continue to evolve in your glass. So watch it if you can watch it. If you just drink it up, it's an easy wine to drink up. So again, though, we are all the way at the end of the Loire Valley, right next to Sancerre. And in this place called Puy-Fumé. And I'll show you some pictures of what it looks like. Where is the vineyard? For this vineyard, this is a great question. This is a little bit specific question. But Debbie's asking, where is the vineyard for Pascal Jolivet relative to Verdigny? This is going to come from a mix or a blend of different vineyards. And so likely these vineyards are pretty scattered, and I don't have the exact location. But to be honest, I don't think it matters too much. So sometimes it does matter, because sometimes you'll see on a label there's a specific vineyard name along with the region, right? So what if this said Puy-Fumé and then it had, like, in quotes, another phrase, another term right below? Well, that would designate that it's probably the vineyard, a specific vineyard. And so they're showcasing you a very particular identity of this place called Puy-Fumé in that case. In our instance, in the wine that's in front of us, this is a generalization of Puy-Fumé, albeit a very precise and stellar one. So they're trying to show you, as the drinker, the consumer, a glimpse of what this region is all about, rather than, in the other case, a singularity, if this makes sense. In Burgundy, that's more and more an instance where you pay attention, but here, probably less so. But I will tell you that Pascal Jolivet is, in my opinion, the best, well, at least the top 3 Puy-Fumé producers. And I'm going to show you how to figure out where to buy this wine when we get there, because I think that's important. I want to give you the tools to figure this out on your own. So we'll also get there. I hope for some of you that this wine surprised you. That is to say, hopefully it kind of exceeded your expectations, or it at least gave you a different side of the grape. This is Pascal Jolivet himself. You'll see the vineyard that he's standing in is just about what all the vineyards here look like. They're on a slope for the most part, and many of Sancerre and Puy-Fumé vineyards are planted on the best part of the slope, which is that mid slope. Perfect drainage, generally perfect exposition to the sun, all of those good components combined. And then you see in the soil, which this is the actual soils that your wine comes from, you'll see these big rocks, this sedimentary material. This is what I love to see in vineyards. Without even tasting the wine, when I see that, I know this wine is going to be something that I'm interested in, because that means there's likely a pretty high degree of minerality in this wine. And so for me, this wine has a little bit of that stoniness that almost feels as if it comes right from the vineyard into your glass. And the science doesn't work quite like that, but it almost feels like that. And you can almost smell it, you can almost taste it, and that's exactly what they would be proud of if they heard you say that in front of them. If they could see that this idea of terroir is being translated into the glass without maybe you even knowing it, that is the highest compliment to especially a French winemaker, but generally old world winemakers, and increasingly new world winemakers too. And so that's what we see here. How long will this wine age is a question that I think about. Maybe you thought about it too. If you had a kind of 750, so a regular size bottle, which generally aged longer than half bottles for a lot of reasons. If you had a normal 750 bottle, this wine would easily age 5, 6, 7, 8 years, in my opinion, if it was perfectly stored. That's insane value. Because again, Puy-Fumé is not going to be at the top of every single wine list because people just don't A, know about it, or B, they just are going to skip over it because it looks like a word that they're not familiar with. So pay attention to Puy-Fumé. Any questions as we move along? Because we will get to all these wines, but you can ask questions along the way too. I will look at them. And just because we skipped over the wine or have moved past it, that's totally fine. We are going to jump into the Bordeaux. So that is, again, that tan, kind of yellow tan label. It says La Croix Bonnie on the label. And so if the label's in front of you, take a look at it. This is a perfect example of what a Bordeaux label looks like, but what an old world label sort of wants to let you see on their label. Again, where is this wine coming from? Well, in the first case, we saw Puy-Fumé. In this case, we see Saint-Estèphe. We know that this is in Bordeaux. Well, now we know because I just let you know. We know that this is in Bordeaux, so that's a good step. However, what grapes are going to be in here? You can look up and down. We are lucky enough that, and sometimes this is the newer tradition, if you can see on the back of this label, there's kind of smaller print, but you will see that they give you an idea of what is in this bottle. In this case, it's planted with Cabernet and Merlot. Increasingly, this is like a trend that is starting to catch on a little bit. No matter what, if we knew this was coming from Bordeaux, we wouldn't really have to even look at a label because it's either, it's almost always going to be Cabernet and Merlot. And the really only difference, aside from a few exceptions, is the percentage of each. On the left bank, we normally have a Cabernet dominant wine. On the right bank, we normally have a Merlot dominant wine. Sometimes Cabernet Franc is the top grape too. But if you know that, then you kind of know what you're getting into. Left bank for the most part is Cabernet forward. Right bank is Merlot forward. And we just kind of look at the percentages in between. Those percentages don't always make that much of a difference. And to be honest, they're probably making it up here and there. Because who knows, like 2% Petit Verdot, what is that going to do to the wine? Will it be like a masterful brushstroke of that just kind of tiny nuance and subtlety? Yes, that's what I think it would be. However, could I pull that out of a wine, or will it change my experience of the wine? Probably not. Will it change the person who's making it, the experience of the person who's making it? Probably. There's a very good reason that small percentage of a grape like that is in the wine. But by and large, what I encourage you to look at is, what are the dominant grapes? And we're going to see this with Ridge too. What are the dominant grapes? Is there something that's 75%, 80%, even 90% of one grape? That's a good way of understanding what you like and what you don't like. So we are in Bordeaux, as I said, right next to the ocean, or at least this inlet of the ocean. And Bordeaux, by far, is the best known area in France. That's not to say it's the most popular right now, but it is the best known area. Why is that? There's several reasons, but one major reason for this is that unlike many of the other places in France and the world at large, Bordeaux was brought up into recognition around the world from or via the merchant class. So whereas a lot of other places were kind of formulated and developed by the clergy, by the church that owned these different estates, this different land, Bordeaux was different. It was the merchant class that took hold of Bordeaux and made it what it was. The merchant class being what they are, they understood marketing much better. They understood how to put this wine, this Bordeaux, into the right people's hands at the right moments. And they also understood logistics, because look at where they are. They are not far from the Atlantic Ocean. They also have these different tributaries going to different parts of France. This is the perfect place to make a wine hub. And so it's not really because Bordeaux just makes incredible wine. They do, but they've been working at it for a long time. It didn't just happen one day that they picked the grapes and like, wow, this is the best stuff I've ever tasted. In fact, it was the opposite of that. Bordeaux used to be far swampier than it is. They had to literally drain this area of water to make sure they could cover or create enough surface area to plant vines in a economically viable manner. So this place is not necessarily just the perfect natural spot to make wine and to grow grapes. It was made that way. But the merchant class understood this, and they made it better and better and better. And they eventually created one of the most impressive reputations for any product or commodity that exists in the world. You can't help but think prestige and sort of regality when you think of Bordeaux, even though not all of it is super expensive. But that's what they've done. And so when we have Bordeaux, and I see there's some questions, let me get here and I'm going to hit your questions. The important part, as I was saying, is left bank and right bank. So this is the river that separates both the left bank and the right bank. So left over here, right over here. The right bank is generally Merlot dominant, the left bank Cabernet Sauvignon. Merlot, of course, has a worse reputation, it's not deserved, than Cabernet Sauvignon, but a small little estate called Petrus is essentially all Merlot. And that wine is pretty good. Maybe you've had it. And it sells for a nice chunk of cash. So Merlot does deserve its proper acclaim, but Cabernet certainly gets most of, if not all, the spotlight. What's important to you is to understand that Merlot generally gives you a little bit plush, juicier, fruity, kind of like blue, purple fruited accents, whereas the left bank gives you that prototypical, at least more so, that prototypical closer to like cigar box, tobacco leaf. They both can do this to a certain extent. They're using a lot of the same grapes, but if you're going to go for this reductionist like versus, that's where you're going to get a little bit earthier, a little bit more structured on the left bank, a little bit kind of darker fruited, and a little bit more open on the right bank. And I'll show you where we are, but let's look at some questions. What do you think about this wine? It's a 2015. To get to Todd's question before we pass over it, he said that he's heard that red wines age much better than white wines. White wines age out after 2-3 years typically. And what is my sort of comment on that? So there's truth and there's both sides of the world in this question. The truth of it is that white wine doesn't generally take as much manual labor to make as red wine. That's the simple truth. And because of that, oftentimes it is the case that red wines are going to live longer because they're treated differently. They're treated in a way that they should live longer. So as you might expect with that reasoning, yes, red wines tend to live longer. In my own experience and looking at a lot of different wine critic lists and all that stuff, white wines tend to be always at the top of their list, and older white wines especially, because the way they age is just kind of beguiling. It's confounding. White wines sometimes stop aging on their acidity, like science tells us they should. Sometimes white wines have more sugar, so that can help them age a little bit too. Think Riesling and other wines, Chenin Blanc. But One of my favorite wines, 1989 Chave Blanc, which is made by Jean-Louis Chave. I've had it a few times in my life. All of them have been mind-bending experiences. That's 1989. And while that's not massively old, that's pretty old. And it was phenomenal. A lot better than a lot of 89 reds I've had. So that's a case-by-case basis, but in general, yes, red wines will, in general, last longer. That doesn't mean you should drink your white wines right away. A lot of white Burgundy needs about 4 or 5 years on the white wine side at the very least. White Bordeaux lasts 20, 30 years easy, no questions asked. So if there's some quality winemaking, age your wines. Don't be afraid of it. 4 or 5 years should be no problem for a lot of white wines. No problem at all. Here's a great question from Kathleen too. Or John under Kathleen. How much does taste versus longevity of a Bordeaux compare to other French wines? Great question. So taste, I think I get this. What I think is happening is maybe how long does a Bordeaux last, and maybe it's like freshness compared to other regions as it grows older. Bordeaux does quite well. Bordeaux can oftentimes, especially red Bordeaux, can meet its 100th birthday and still be drinkable, still be interesting, still have a lot of charisma and charm, and a lot of regions just cannot compete with that. And so Bordeaux really wins that. In addition, and this is one reason why I bring you Bordeaux, you can generally sit on a bottle of a bottle of red Bordeaux that's made well, that doesn't have to cost you a lot. And you can sit on that wine for 10, 15 years easily. Don't even think about opening it because it needs that much time. It's also a wine that really needs a lot of time to unravel, to fully develop, to gain all of its kind of mature edges. You know, a 20-year Bordeaux, if I could have brought that and sourced that, which is not easy to source, because most people are drinking them or holding on to them. A 20-year Bordeaux, though, that's a pretty nice drinking window for a lot of Bordeaux, 20 years old. And so, yeah, it stands the test of time much better than many other regions. Of course, there are a lot of exceptions there. In comparison to Burgundy, which often costs a lot more, especially now because Burgundy is the darling child, you are getting far more value in your Bordeaux bottle than you are in your Burgundy, by and large. The Burgundy demand is so high that the prices are insane. And even a lower level Burgundy can still be great, delicious, is going to cost you 50 to 100 bucks. Lower level. You can buy a profound bottle of Bordeaux at 50, 75 bucks. That will last a very long time and will compete with some really high-end wines. You can also buy a Bordeaux that costs 20 to 30 bucks and be totally blown away by what's in it. So look at Bordeaux. This is one reason why I bring it to you. Even though you might think Bordeaux should be the most expensive, given the reputation it has, it is not today. It is absolutely not. And the right bank especially has a lot of great quality that might be interesting to you, especially if you like this wine. I said this wine is from the left bank, or maybe I didn't, but I said it's from Saint Estèphe, and it is from the left bank. However, this is one of those oddballs where the Merlot is dominant. So Merlot is dominant in this wine. Cabernet takes a second seat. Maybe you didn't know that. But look at how great this wine's already holding up. 2015, a big year. So you see 2015 in the middle of your bottle. You'll see Saint Estèphe. La Croix Bonnie is the name of this wine, but it comes from a larger estate called Paillon-Ségur, which you'll see at the back, Chateau Paillon-Ségur, which is a very well-known estate. So this is a bottling from them. All comes from the same grapes vineyards. A lot of Bordeaux wines do this with their second and third wines. Those are the wines to look for, in my opinion. Of course, it's great to have a Chateau Brion hanging around somewhere. It's great to have Chateau Margaux, all that stuff. Those are going to cost you a little bit of cash. So maybe that's not always the wine you're reaching for. You save that for special occasions. When you do look for wines that are a little bit more everyday, look for second and thirds. The quality is astonishingly high, and a lot of these estates are using the same grapes. They just might not be the same age, might be younger vines. But by and large, it's the same place, the same quality is in that, the same people are making it in the same space. So give those second and thirds a chance. Let me catch up on these questions because I do want to pay attention to them. One of them is back to the Puy Fumé. Is there a place online which lists the wine grapes for each village? You could always Google it. When we look and search, I don't think it says it on Wine Searcher, but we'll see if it does pop up. Always Google it though. That's going to help you. There's a lot of different, you could just Google like wine grapes of France, and I bet a chart would pop right up. So that shouldn't be too hard and hold you back much. The influence of both the ocean and the river contribute to this wine. I assume that is for the Bordeaux based on the timestamp. Definitely. The ocean, again, is going to be a factor that really helps with hotter temperatures. And we are in kind of the southwestern part of France, not quite, but really near there. And so what's going to happen is a lot of that heat is going to be a bit mitigated by the ocean, by winds that come through, whatnot. We're in pretty flat lands here. You don't have the elevation as you do in some other regions that can really cool down grapes and allow them to rest. So you want that river effect and that ocean effect. It's going to help a lot. The riverbed certainly supplies enough water to these grapes. So even when it's a drought, even when it's hot, these grapes are going to find water in the right way. So yeah, all of that very much influences this wine. Without those factors, let's say, you might have an area that is so dry, hot, desiccated, that you're only producing wines that are so heavy with sugar because of the ripening process, that they're not that exciting to drink. They lack nuance, they lack subtlety, they lack all these different things. So what these natural bodies of water are doing are helping create some semblance of an equilibrium. Interesting on the label, Cab comes before the Merlot. The labels do this probably because it's alphabetical, but they probably also want to tell you that, they're almost always going to put Cabernet before Merlot if they have the chance. The other interesting thing there is it doesn't tell you the percentage. It's probably on purpose, because they understand how wines are going to sell. At the end of the day, it's marketing. It's making money. It's a commodity. So they follow the same rules as just about anything else on the shelf, for better or worse. But yeah, that is kind of a tricky thing that labels do. And it seems kind of not fair, to be honest. And I would agree. And so that's why some labels are becoming a little bit more transparent, even if they're from across the ocean. All right, so let's move on to the ridge as we're talking, just so I can give all these wines the proper due. While you're doing that, John has a question. What is my favorite wine? His neighbor loves Petrus. It's a little bit pricey, indeed it is. And John prefers a Barolo. I prefer white wine. I've had a lot of wine in my life, I guess, but I love white wine, to be honest. And I don't really have a favorite though. I've probably opened millions of dollars of wine. At least I know I have. I haven't really tried to keep track, but it would make sense. It tracks well. I've also poured probably around $1 million of wine down the drain because it's been flawed, corked, etc. So I've had a decent amount of wine, and white wine just still grabs me. It's a harder wine, I think, to really kind of understand all the layers and stuff, but I like it for its freshness, to be honest. Can a Barolo really steal my heart? Yes, absolutely. Would I ever turn down any sip of Petrus? I would not. So I'm really not that picky. But if I have a perfect wine, it's very much like that Puy Fumé, which reminds me a lot of Chablis in white Burgundy. All right, make sure this ridge is poured. The cellar behind me is a cellar in Germany. I just like this picture, and I think it's very kind of eerie and nice fall, winter, weird cellar vibes. But it's very representative of what an old cellar looks like. I believe this is J.B. Becker's cellar in Germany. It really looks like, I know I've had this picture for a reason, but I have so many of these. But this should be J.B. Becker's cellar, and it's just like this old school cellar, no tricks, nothing. and he makes some really stellar wine. And I think that's kind of gives you the wine experience. So smell this wine. Lots of fruit, but fruit in a great way. No, I mean, if I smelled this, I would almost think Bordeaux, this California wine, which is, I think that's a compliment, but I don't, not like California needs to be Bordeaux. I think California should be California, but I really love the smell of this wine. Whew, it smells lovely. So here is California. And what is interesting about California is that California actually started winemaking down here in San Diego, right on that border where the missionaries were coming from Mexico. They started planting their vines in San Diego and really Southern California, Los Angeles, all around here, Temecula. That's where wine started in California. It didn't get up here to where we kind of probably associate California wine with all these regions in the north until the gold rush. Obviously, that saw a lot of capital moving through this area. People understood an opportunity. These people needed to drink. So why don't we explore these vineyards and these hillsides and really make some wine? And that's what they did. And so that's why you see a concentration of places primarily up here. There's other reasons too. Up here, you find a lot of elevation. So California can get hot. I'm from California, so I know that. And it often stays hot, depending on where you are. And so you need elevation to bring down those temperatures and allow these grapes to have a chance at expressing themselves in an individual way, rather just blown out with ripeness and super extracted wines. And so a lot of elevation up here allows that. They have found, of course, that grapes like Cabernet Sauvignon, Zinfandel, what else is in here? Carignan. There's probably also Mourvedre. A lot of these grapes do extremely well in this environment. And so that's why it exists. Why do I bring you a California wine? Well, I bring you one of the pioneers of excellent California wine, Ridge. If you've ever had Ridge Montebello, crazy wine. That's their top wine. It exists alongside many other fantastic bottles on the regular. And that's pretty much what put them on the map. However, that bottle can be a little pricey. So you look at what else Ridge makes. And this is one of my favorites. So on this label, you'll see that it says Ridge. You'll see Geyserville 2020. We are in the New World. So that whole idea of trying to hide the grapes or trying to be a little bit kind of sketchy about what's in the bottle, at least a little bit sneaky, is gone out the door. In the New World, front and center is the grape. So at New World bottlings, it's normally there. In the New World, you can look for the grape as opposed to the region and figure out what you're drinking. So you can flip that script when it comes to New World. They actually tell you down to the 1% of Mataro, which is Mourvedre, on this label. They even give you the 2%, Alicante Boucher. But this is primarily Zinfandel, 69%. Zinfandel is another wine that California didn't do like necessarily well with, in my opinion. There's some phenomenal Zinfandel. There is also the stuff my dad used to drink that I would not allow anyone else to touch because that is gross. So Zinfandel can come in a lot of different varieties. What I love about Zinfandel, when it's made by, about 4 or 5 producers make it really well like this, is that it's made from old vines. These are the type of vines that you would find in the actual Ridge vineyards. And these vines are around 130, sometimes even 150 years old, which is crazy. Vines are normally like 30 years old in your, just pick a random plot of land around the world. They're generally around 30 years old. These vines, though, in California are some of the oldest vines the state has. There's Zinfandel. This is what was planted right as phylloxera was ripping through, and many of these plantings were not affected by phylloxera because it's right on that turnaround. This was a bug, a disease, a louse that jumped from plant to plant and devastated vineyards. So a lot of these Zinfandel vines were planted right after that. And so they were never affected because of that. It was already resilient. And so they've stood the test of time throughout. And now we have very old Zinfandel vines. when you taste this wine, what I think you should taste is some of that powerful beauty of old vine. Old vine means that when it creates its grapes, it does not create many. The relatively few that it creates with these kind of gnarled trunks and vineyard and branches, the few stuff that it does create is highly concentrated with some great juice. And so when you just are making wine with that, your end product is vastly different than if you are making wine from a vigorous grape. Wine from a vigorous vine that creates a whole bunch of grapes, if that makes sense. So that's what's happening in this wine. Does this surprise anyone, for those of you who don't know Ridge? I hope it surprises you. Puy. Oh, so here's another one. This is a fun question from Linda, because it shows you the small obscurities and kind of the minutia of the wine world and the wine villages, the wine names. She has a friend that likes Puy Fuissé, and how close is Puy Fumé next to Puy Fuissé? Puy Fuissé is in the bottom of Burgundy, so it's Chardonnay. How close are they? They're not super far away, but they're not really. Chablis and Puy Fumé and Sancerre are pretty close to each other, but Puy Fuissé and Sancerre or Puy Fumé are less close to each other. And the differences in climate are such, and soils and whatnot, are such that they're probably going to taste a little different. You can find very good examples of Puy Fuissé, not necessarily going to taste exactly like this, but they can, depending on who you're getting it from. That's a fun one because they're so close to each other. Here's one about this wine, I believe. How does the age of a vine contribute to the quality? Well, because, I mean, think of the age of a vine like the age of a person. And this kind of hits Cynthia's question too, old vine versus new vines. Think of the age of a vine like the age of a person. As you grow older, you gain in wisdom, hopefully, and you gain in this kind of worldly experience. You have more to bring to the table than when you were a youngin. Vines have a very similar way of interacting with the world. As vines get older, they are more resilient because they've seen more, they've existed through more. They have a more developed system underneath the ground to pull the nutrients they need. So all of that's there. But this idea that they just don't produce as much quantity, the quality goes higher because it's injected into all of those grapes they do make. And so winemakers have this choice to keep their old vines that don't produce as much. So sometimes that's a financial decision, and rip them out and plant in new ones, or keep them and up the level of the overall product. In this case, they keep them. And so they have a pretty stellar product on display simply because they have so many old vines in this bottling. And you can tell that there is this kind of majestic spirit. Would this wine taste different if it was predominantly young vines that make up that Zinfandel? Absolutely, it would. It would not be as interesting. It would not be as nuanced, and you would not find as much depth. It would still be good. It would be far fruitier. It wouldn't have those kind of earthy intrigue that really kind of gets me going with this wine, that I'm like, wow, every sip, there's something else going on that's not just the fruit. It wouldn't have that. It would be a little bit more one-dimensional, you could say, where here you have multi-dimensions interacting with each other. How long should you age this wine? Which I think is a good question. You should age this wine for, in a perfect world, I'd love to see this wine at 10 years old. I mean, surely past that, but I think 10 years old would be a really nice place to check in. 5 years old, easily. It's already 2023 or almost 2024. 5 years, easy. So 7, 8, 10 years, 12 years, 15 years. If you're aging this in the proper environment, no problem. And price-wise, that's a steal. It is wild. I don't think I've had OVR unless it's a abbreviation for something that I know of differently. But If it has a full name and you're using an abbreviation for it, Debbie, let me know what the full name is, and I can maybe answer that. All right, how do you find these wines? And I'll look. Oh, Old Vine Red. So you're just saying Old Vine Red, made by Ridge. Is that right? Let me do this first. Wine Searcher is going to be your friend, and I'm going to show you how to use it. The producer is Marietta, right? I haven't had them, so I don't know. But old vines in general are something everyone should look out for. So this is something that is important. Old vines are worthy of your attention, and pay attention when you see them. Okay, so this is winesearcher.com. And this is all I've done so far is put in Montebello and Ridge. So same winery, Ridge. Montebello is the specific wine. And you can find right here by state. And I know we have a lot of PAers. So let's check PA. All right, so this includes stores that ship to the state over here. If I were to uncheck that box, bam, I have one place in Harrisburg that has this bottle by request. Sometimes that means they don't have the bottle. Sometimes that means they're going to order it for you. So if you ever see this by request, they might be playing a little bit of games, or it might just because Pennsylvania has a very interesting and exciting way of dealing with liquor. So it could be one or the other. By request generally means they're going to have to order it for you, so you couldn't just drop by the store if that was a possibility. Obviously, now that I'm seeing it, Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board, so PA might not be the best place to check. You might want to check what other places can ship it to you, and there are a lot. Most of these places are auctions. So if you're looking at fine wine, which Montebello is, sometimes an auction is going to pop out, and realize an auction is just like any other auction for wine. It's highly competitive for sure. So if you're trying to understand how wine auctions work, go for some lower end stuff just to get a feel. You have no idea for the most part generally where these wines are coming from. So there is a risk in that, but they can be very fun. And as any auction, may be slightly addicting. But you'll see a lot of auction houses have a wine like this. You can see magnums, a lot of these different things, all here. This is winesearcher.com. And I think it is one of the best sites. Does it say the grape? I think we wanted to see if that question was there. I don't think so. But normally Vivino, if you kind of attach it to that, will show you the grape. If you don't know producer, here's the thing. Always take pictures of your bottles that you like, because the producer is going to help you so much. That is to say, if you only know you like Puy Fumé and you type it in, well, you're probably going to get a lot of different responses, right? You're going to have these producers that Michel Bailly, Jean Pabio happens to be pretty good, Vincent Vetin. You're going to have a whole bunch of different producers that pop up. So if you wanted to pick like Jolivet, then you could find something that's a little bit closer to exactly what you were drinking. So pay attention to your producers, take pictures of them. And this is a really good way of understanding, how to get wine shipped to your doorstep. This is a great question too, on the question of Puy Fumé, and I'll go back to Wine Searcher in a second. Is the wine, the Puy Fumé, oaked? It has older oak. So what happens generally is going to be that it ferments in stainless steel. So the fermentation process, that initial process, is generally happens in these massive stainless steel tanks. And that process gets pretty hot. So if you were to ferment instead in oak, which a lot of red wines will do, ferment in oak, that process is so hot that it generally takes a lot of that oak flavor into the wine, into the actual profile of the wine. And sometimes in a crisp and fresh mineral-driven white wine, you don't really want that. And so the stainless steel is going to help. Then they generally move it to older barrels, almost never new barrels, depending on what wine it is. Some fancier wines, they'll move to new barrels, but generally it's older barrels. And that's how the wine can really achieve a more interesting way of evolving and maturing. You don't have to have oak for a wine to be exciting, but generally it's there for the wines that you just kind of look at and think twice about. You're like, whoa, whether you know it or not. Sometimes oak is in vanilla. We can smell that in the ridge. There's definitely a vanilla smell here. I like it. I think it's pleasant, but it's definitely there. Sometimes the oak is a little bit more subtle, nuanced, and hidden. That's generally the case. So yeah, they're using both ways in the Puy Fumé. Linda's asking if I am horrified by Pennsylvania and New Jersey wines, or do you think it's good that vineyards are tasting and tastings are sprouting up? I don't think I guess I'm mixed. I don't think you need to go out of the way to taste these wines. However, I think if they're nearby, that's great. Just like, I live in Brooklyn, I live in New York, and the Finger Lakes are not an area where I'm telling like all my friends like, yo, you have to check this out. I'm not doing that. And I don't feel bad about not doing that. However, if I am kind of in the summer, the spring, and I'm in a wine shop and I see some wines from the Finger Lakes and we're going for a pretty easy vibe picnic atmosphere that day, then I'll pick up a bottle, and that's perfect because it's not going to blow my mind and it's not supposed to. And that's great. So for every occasion, there is that bottle that you reach for. And I think to draw this back to, New Jersey and Pennsylvania wines, there are occasions for those wines where it might be good. But should you like go out of your way and spend too much time researching it? I don't think so. You can try to change my mind though, if you like. If you chilled a wine but don't drink it, should you keep it chilled? Yes and no. You should never try to make a wine go up and down in temperature, and that's mainly more like drastic ups and downs. So that is to say, you're in like an underground cave cellar, you're drinking wine, then you bring your wine up, put it in your car, let it sit in that car for like 3 hours, and it's pretty hot outside. That's going to mess with the wine. If it's relative, near temperature, not going to mess with it too much. But I'm glad you brought this up, because all of these wines, because they're made well, are going to last the next few days easily and be just as interesting, if not more. Some of the reds especially will be evolving, but put all of them, no matter their color, in your fridge. Just put the cork back on it, put it in the fridge. Obviously the red wines need to temper once you bring them back out to drink some more of them. You don't want that red wine to be as cold as, a beer or something. But you want it to have a chill no matter. So put them in there. The fridge slows down the oxidation process. It slows down the progression, which is what you want, because these wines are kind of dying as they see oxygen. That's why we're getting so many flavors out of them at once. And you want to slow that down just as you would anything else in the fridge, like fruit, etc. So put them all back there. Should you always chill your red wines? Yes. If you did not chill your red wines tonight, I am not the chill police, but I very much recommend and encourage you to do it next time. Because especially with a red wine like our last ridge, you are going to find so much more interesting lift from a slightly chilled ridge bottle than you would if that wine is closer to room temperature. At room temperature, you're going to notice the alcohol more. You're going to notice maybe the acidity more. And you're going to maybe like those things are going to dominate where they don't need to. So when you chill it, those things take a back seat and allow that whole wine to come forward. And that's what you're looking for. The reason why we had this lineup is because the Bordeaux is 2015. So it's older. It's a little bit more mature. It's a little bit more toned down. It's a little bit kind of softer on its edges, where the ridge is a 2020. So it's a little bit more in your face. It hasn't had that time to fully take in what it is quite yet. So that's going to be a stronger presence on your palate, the ridge, than the Bordeaux. That's why we did that in that succession. So I know we're getting to the end. I want to, first of all, thank all of you for your attention and your great questions. Remember, Wine Searcher is a great tool, especially if you live in a place where you probably need wine shipped to you. know that you do need to put in the producer for the most part if you're going to find any, interesting results. So make sure you do that. Take pictures of your bottles and also talk about wine how you want to talk about it. Don't let anyone change that. That's the way you understand it. And that's the way that's probably going to be easiest to communicate to someone else. So again, thank you. I hope these wines were delicious as a trio. These represent to me some of the most exciting wines in the world, to be honest. This is what I like to drink on the regular. And I want to thank you. Enjoy them on your own. Have a lovely rest of your fall and or winter. And I hope to see you again soon. Back to Jerry.
Thank you, Brandon. That was amazing. As usual, I really learned a lot, and your presentation was excellent. And thank you to our wonderful clients for joining us tonight. We really enjoyed spending this time with you, and will continue to remain focused every day on reaching your goals. We have an amazing calendar of special client events planned for you in 2024, and hope that you can join us for many of those as well. Good night, everyone. We hope you have a wonderful holiday season, and we look forward to talking with you soon.